take the stage. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. You can all see me. Welcome to our first event here for DeSci Network and DeSci Monthly. For those of you who maybe are not aware, I'll just do a quick introduction. We are DeSci Monthly or DeSci Network. We are putting together a monthly newsletter. We're super pumped about what DeSci is doing in the world. We think it's a very important leap forward in technology and in applying technology to science. And we are trying to build awareness of what is going on in the DeSci world. So what we are doing here in our first event, we've gathered some of the top minds, some of the top leaders, co-founders in DeSci in Web3. And we are going to discuss in our inaugural Web3 DeSci event about DeSci. Is it a fad? Is it the future? Is it revolutionary? Is it just another crypto trend? What is it? So we have Jelani up here. I'm going to bring the other speakers on stage right now. We have 4 incredible minds here gathered here tonight. And so I'm going to allow each person to introduce themselves. I'll go very briefly. My name is Dinidh O'Brien. I am the head of international and public relations for both Data Lake and the Donate Your Data Foundation. We are building a global medical data donation program network, which is using blockchain technologies. I won't go any further because Wojciech will definitely have more to say. Just going in order of what I see on the screen, Jelani, please introduce yourself, who you are and what you're doing, and why you're here at our DeSci event.
For sure. So, excuse me. So my name is Jelani. I'm a neuroimmunologist by training. You may recognize my voice as the host of DeSci Rising. So I'm a core at DeSci World, which is an information aggregation and social engagement hub for the DeSci space. So we collect project data, and it's kind of the go-to place if you're looking to learn more about the DeSci space. You want to just provide a platform for people to ease people's maneuvering and activity within the space. I'm also the co-founder of DeSci Peaks, which is a monthly state of the market for the DeSci space, where we take a look back at what has been going on in the DeSci space over the previous month and kind of have this open discussion forum where participants can come in and talk about interesting topics, hot takes, perspectives, and really critique the DeSci space, because it's all nice and good to talk about, where we're going and all the great things that we're doing, but it's also good to take a step back and look at, critically look at what we're trying to build and what is the best way of doing so. So that's just a brief rundown of who I am.
I love it. So you're bringing some common sense, but also adoption, trying to get the word out. And I think we really need more of that in crypto. So fantastic. Next in order on my screen, Keith, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and your involvement with DeSci?
Sure thing. So, hey, everyone, I'm Keith Comito, president of Lifespan.io, which is a 501c3 organization that works to raise funds and awareness specifically for research aimed at extending healthy human lifespan through addressing the aging process. And what the audience might not know is that there's always been a confluence between interest in this type of research with blockchain technology, all the way back to the early cypherpunks like Hal Finney, all the way through to the pioneers of the present, like Vitalik Buterin. So I'm very interested in that confluence. In addition to basically outreaching to the public, we do crowdfunding initiatives, YouTube celebrity stuff. We run the most trafficked news outlet, basically trying to build a grassroots movement to support this research and make it a priority, just like what the early cancer advocates did in the 1940s. In addition to that, I'm also a technology inventor, having created applications for companies such as Major League Baseball, HBO, most recently Disney. And where that's all kind of joining now is in the area of blockchain technology, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about on this call, blockchain could really help to solve some of the systemic issues with like healthcare data and how to really bring the benefits of science to everybody in the world. So I'm excited to hopefully speak about that with you all here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Keith. Really excited to hear what you have to say for sure. Wojciech, you're next on my screen. I know who you are. Tell the other people who you are, what you're doing, and DeSci Web3, all of it.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Wojciech. I'm a medical doctor by profession. But what I've been doing recently is working on the frontiers, either geographically in sub-Saharan Africa, as previously a founder of a humanitarian organization, and right now at the frontier of science. And what we are doing at Data Lake and the Donate Your Data Foundation, we are building a new donation system in healthcare, just like blood donation or bone marrow donation or organ donation, and we are doing it for data donation. We are doing that because there is a tremendous problem with democratic and open access to good quality data of proven provenance for research of different kind. And we just believe that the time is actually ripe for change, with DeSci movement on the rise, with digitization of healthcare repositories, with the COVID pandemic that already made everybody aware about the importance of having good quality data sets.
Amazing. Thank you, Wojciech, very much. Jeffrey, you are the last one, but not least. Who are you? What are you doing in relation to DeSci? Please go ahead.
So hello everyone, I'm Jeffrey. I'm just from the University of Cambridge. So I just run our platforms for the manuscript and the data in a decentralized way. Just because that when I was a PhD student, so I published my papers with very high publishing cost and subscription fee. And we thought that Web3 gives a very bright perspectives for sharing our manuscript, including preprints and publications and any script in a decentralized way. And we can just prove the ownership and authorship of that manuscript. So as well as the data, we can have the sovereignty in the future with the help of blockchain technology and Web3 platforms. So that's why we're here, and we're very glad to be invited to just discussing with about the all views just today, coming today, and yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I mean, we have founders, we have inventors, we have PhDs, we have doctors, we have a lot of talent, a lot of brains represented in our panel. So thank you guys so much for making the time. And I really hope for all of those listening, thank you also straight up the bat for being here. I really think it's going to be super interesting. Just a point of order for the audience, we are going to be opening up the floor to questions later on towards the end. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. You're welcome to ask them during the Q&A session when we open it up, where there will be a specific place to ask your question. Okay, so let's get into it. We're all here. Let's start the discussion. So I really want to start a little bit more broadly, just so everyone understands. DeSci is the application of blockchain or Web3 technologies in science and to solve scientific issues, be it operational, funding related, etc. What I would love to ask each of you, and everyone will have a chance to answer this. In what area are you most excited about DeSci and the application of blockchain in terms of humanity's progress, in terms of solving problems? Obviously, this may be a little bit more related to what you're personally doing, or it may not. But Keith, why don't you go first? What is the area that you're most excited about when it comes to DeSci and how it's going to help humanity?
Sure. I'm going to cheat and give a couple of quick answers. So number one is obviously just in funding of science itself, which is kind of obvious, but not just in terms of it being a good source for funding, but, there are a lot of organizations that right now that are building very, kind of like DeFi models, coupling it to fund with philanthropy. So I'm sure we can get into the details there, but that's very exciting to drive decentralized funding to important work. But what I'm probably most directly involved in and excited about is how decentralized science could really radically change how the clinical trial system works, for example, to really engage the public to contribute in a direct way, to see incentives from their contributions, and honestly, to just get therapies or potential therapies in their hands as soon as possible. So we can talk about that, I'm sure. And then as a fun adjunct, seeing how games could also leverage support into actually not just funding, but also even in the kind of clinical trial side a little bit. And there's been some precedent for that in the past. So hopefully 3 answers wasn't too many.
No, not at all. And I think it's really exciting to see the kind of nexus of gamification technology, but also doing important things. So it's kind of like the idea behind folding at home, but maybe adding a computer game element, right? Now, all of a sudden, adoption may be a little bit faster. So, but since you mentioned clinical trials and that sort of thing, Wojciech, I may pass it over to you since I think it may be related.
Yeah, thank you. I'll actually try to answer this question by not saying that I'm excited with medical data, but just giving some broad categories where I think it's pragmatic and it makes sense to use Web3 technology. So the first one is to address issues of trust, and they are omnipresent if we are talking funding, if we are talking money, if we are talking of sharing of sensitive information. The second one, I think that it would be, broadly speaking, creating a community. And this is the area where we've seen tremendous potential in decentralized movements, in people taking matters in their own hands. And sort of connected with creation of community is incentivization models that were either not illegal or not pragmatic or not easily scalable or replicated using traditional technologies. So instead of giving some very specific examples, I'd rather point out to these categories of problems where I actually think using blockchain and decentralizations and tokens and Web3 tools, it's not a fad, and it actually makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And for me, really, what DeSci represents actually is kind of a return to these fundamental elements of blockchain, right? Returning to removing the need for trust between entities, but obviously in the scientific realm. So, Jeffrey, you take the floor. What areas of DeSci are you super excited about?
Yeah, I think the most exciting things is including those two aspects. First one is like we can secure the researchers and scientists' assets, including the intellectual properties, and as well as like license and the copyrights. So by using this Web3 technology, especially the non-fungible token, the NFT, so we're gonna have like the multiple collaborators can be clearly claimed their ownerships on chain. So by by implementing this way, different from like the previous platform, we can have like any kind of assets, including the data, experimental findings, the manuscript, and if in the future, as like a case proposed that the research funding, and in the future we can have like the research proposal can be also tokenized in the on the blockchains and claim that which part is like the research, which part is belongs to the funding support. So I would say like this is a very exciting thing. Another thing is that I strongly agree with the Wojciech, and it's like the community that because we have like the decentralized autonomous organization, we have the DAO tools, and in the future we're gonna have like the democracy to try to just push our scientists and researchers in a decentralized, a more equal way.
100%, and we're definitely going to be talking a little bit about DAOs and the implications of them for scientific funding and the direction of scientific research in a little bit. So thank you for that. And then Jelani, please, you have the floor.
So I'm glad I kind of went last because my opinion kind of picks from all of the speakers' perspectives. I think if you sum it all up, at least in my perspective, what DeSci brings and what I'm most excited in is that DeSci seems to reduce the barrier to entry in science. All of these different points really make science a more amenable place for scientists and formally trained scientists, as well as science curious citizen scientists, to kind of make a home within the scientific realm. And how I like to put it is it injects, that reduction of the barrier injects a level of entropy within a system. And I very much believe that science is a contact sport. There's a lot of interaction that has to exist within science to drive innovation. And that injection, that reduction of barrier that the tooling provides, that injection of entropy by opening it up to a lot of different mindsets and opportunities and individuals is what is going to, in my opinion, drive innovation. So I think DeSci is the focal catalyst that will really drive the next few decades of innovation in science. And I'm very much excited to be a part of that and to witness all that's going to come out of it.
If any of you want to respond, of course, feel free to any of your other host comments as well, by the way. So, I mean, on that topic, I think, one of the questions we talked about having today is, are there any challenges of onboarding people into Web3? And do you find any, for all of you, as you're talking about it, I mean, I've definitely experienced this. Do you find any pushback when you start to mention blockchain, Web3 technologies, and DeSci? Obviously, Jelani, as you've said, it presents opportunities. So I'd love to talk about both the opportunities and the challenges of bringing people into DeSci. Anyone who wants to answer, please go ahead.
I might take first on this. So I think, yes, there are definitely a lot of challenges as it comes to onboarding individuals into the space. Scientists, medical practitioners, healthcare professionals are notoriously difficult individuals to kind of shift the mind of a paradigm. I think as a trained scientist, we're kind of fitted within a certain box, and we're used to operating within this box, and we're almost taught to question and be kind of wary of any novelty coming in. So that definitely makes our target audience much more difficult to bring into the space. The other thing is we're fighting against a gigantic PR campaign that is set against us. The vision of blockchain technology as it relates to crypto and scams is very much against it has a negative tone to it. So not only fighting this whole paradigm shift, but also the added negative perspective on top of it. So it makes it more difficult. But I think we're all, as scientists and as participants within this arena, I think we're all used to challenges, and challenges, I hope, tend to spark this, not competitive edge, but idea like, okay, this is a new challenge. Let's handle it. I'm sure Keith, as an inventor, can speak to this as well. So we definitely have challenges, but I don't think they're insurmountable. I think contrary, almost paradoxically, because we are impact driven and the space is looking to specifically solve defined problems and developing tech for that, I think we'll actually be the spearheading voice, or one of the spearheading voices in this adoption of DLT, distributed ledger technology, and blockchain technology.
Yeah, I could pick up the ball, Jelani, from that. Absolutely. So I could speak to two specific challenges that I've encountered repeatedly, kind of boots on the ground, and optimism on how we're going to solve them, right? So one of them is just, the friction involved if you're a non-crypto person. As an example, we at Lifespan.io, we put a lot of projects in Gitcoin rounds, for example. And they're changing that now with the new grants protocol. That's going to be much easier to use. But, a couple of months ago, when I was trying to convince the longevity community that wasn't necessarily crypto savvy or anyone to, go donate through these crypto rails, everyone's like, what the heck's this gas fee? And like, oh my God, this is so complicated. I had to write like a 20-step kind of like guideline. So like for the normies, that's like still a massive barrier, right? And then on the narrative side, at Lifespan.io, we have a channel, a YouTube channel with 3 million subscribers called Life Noggin, where we do a lot of education, and a lot of our audience just happens to be gamers, right? And we tried to make a little bit of content that touched the topic of NFTs. And it was like hitting the third rail with our audience, right? Because the gamer community, they think NFTs and they think like microtransaction BS, and they don't really know what it means, or they think it's going to lead to theft of artistic work instead of actually being the protective measures for artistic work that it really is. And now, so those are the problems that I see, two of them. And the way that we solve those problems, for the latter problem first, is just we have to get better about telling the story of crypto, telling the story of NFTs. What is this? Why is this revolutionary? What is really going on? So I think we have a part to play in that. And on the first issue of the payment rails and stuff, that's actively being developed, as Jelani mentioned, by inventors all over the space that are creating, smoother on-ramps. Like I believe Vitalik had mentioned, that the goal here is at some point through like layer 2s, et cetera, that like for my mom, like she won't even know she's using crypto, right? So when we get to that point, then I think we'll have much more mainstream adoption. So those are my comments.
If I can pick up from here and sort of build on what you, Jelani, and you, Keith, have said, I think that we also have to be cognizant of the fact that it will take time, and I probably it's reasonable to think about other breakthroughs that happen in healthcare, like invention of antibiotics, of antiseptics, of painkillers, and so on. And they weren't embraced by the medical community once they were invented. Actually, they were fought for years and years and years. And of course, the world has accelerated. We now are exchanging knowledge much more rapidly. So I'm actually hopeful that this will not be like, in the case of anesthesia invention, for instance, but it will take time. And I think that the kind of language that we use is the one that will show answers to very specific problems that the scientific community or the physician community or the hospital community have. So in our case, we are not using blockchain and the narrative of blockchain and crypto and Web3 when speaking to healthcare community. We are actually showing them how we can address the problems that they have of inaccessibility of data, of monetization of data, and so on and so on. So I fully agree with you, Keith, that probably in years to come, healthcare entities or physicians or scientists will not even know that they are using Web3 technologies, and yet they will be able to address real problems using them. And that's, I think, the direction we are heading to.
Jeffrey, did you want to add something?
Yeah.
I see. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Following up the previous comments, I think there are two difficulties to just extend Web3 technology now. The first one is we can say from the product or technology side, the user interface for Web3 is very hard and it's not easy user friendly. So a lot of concepts, including like NFTs, blockchain or distributed ledgers can just frighten a lot of scientists and researchers away. And another thing is that, for example,
They got him.
Yeah, they got him again. I think we'll give him a second to get himself situated or whatever. But I so it's really interesting. I'll just take over for him. In my job, I do a lot of talking with very traditional stakeholders, or even data conferences or whatever. And as soon as we introduce blockchain or Web3, people start to get a little nervous, and even talking with the European government, they're recommending these technologies. But as soon as you start to talk about them, people in the offices, actually in the meetings, do get a little bit nervous, right? So we do have to mitigate against this. But yeah, it's really interesting. But at the same time, these technologies provide solutions to real issues, right? So it's, I think, as you said, Keith, it's really getting to the point, and it's going to take time, as you said, Wojciech, getting to the point where we don't even see it, right? People in Europe, we have the SWIFT network that settles bank transfers behind the scenes. Nobody cares about that. They don't care how it works. They just want to know that when they click a button, sends money, it arrives there quickly, and they don't get charged for it, right? So this is really where I think a lot of this is going to be going to, where it sinks into the background. We don't see it, and we don't expect, let's say, more traditional stakeholders to know or care about these technologies. So actually, moving to a related topic, I wanted to ask each of you, as you have, let's say, contact or engagement with stakeholders in various industries, are you seeing DeSci Web3 adoption taking place, and what is that looking like? I mean, you don't have to share any like trade secrets or anything like that, but in your dealings within the space, what are you starting to see in terms of DeSci and Web3 in traditional verticals, different markets?
So I might start there, and I think so to the point of not revealing any trade secrets or anything, I've noticed a lot of Web2 pharma companies and biotech kind of turning the eye towards the Web3 space, looking for participants who are at least Web3 literate to kind of come on board and kind of help maybe craft like a Web3 wing. They're not jumping headfirst into it, obviously, as they have a lot of restrictions from the regulatory standpoint, investor standpoint. But I'm seeing a lot of curiosity and at least, dipping of toes into the space. We've noticed, some of the big names, we've seen Pfizer start to invest in certain DAOs and other of these big names, which has brought a lot of attention into this space and people now becoming curious. Funny enough, for myself, I come from a biotech background, working in the biotech sphere. And at a time earlier this year, I was talking to some of my colleagues and other colleagues that work in other companies and across the field about it. And, similar to you, Dinidh, it's kind of like you hear Web3, you hear blockchain, and it's almost like a trigger word. It's almost like a revulsion, like, oh no. And recently I've started to have people come back and say, oh, well, you remember that thing that you were talking about? Well, I've started to see XYZ happening. We may be interested in kind of sitting down and wanting to learn more about it. So I take that as a big plus, especially since this happened within a year. I do think that it's going to be slow moving, but I guess to Wojciech's point of the previous question, the one hope that I have is that because these frameworks are largely permissionless and it is easy for individuals to enter, yes, there's the barrier of like the learning curve of like signing a wallet and all this kind of stuff, but for all intents and purposes, the framework is very open. Crowdsource funding of research projects, crowdsource activity, donation of medical data. People don't need to be told when it's okay for it to happen. They can just come in and test it out themselves at the individual retail level. And I hope and I think that is going to expedite the adoption of this once, the abstraction, the micro pains are abstracted away.
I actually think there is also, the whole category of problems that are very uniquely to be suited to be solved by Web3. And where governments and corporations tremendously failed in the past in solving them. So one example is actually sharing of your medical data. And by analogy to other donation systems, if you think about it, blood donation wasn't built by a corporation, nor bone marrow donation was built by a conglomerate of governments. So they were actually put together by a grassroots movement of people and scientists and medical doctors. And right now, we can replicate the sorts of social movements on steroids using the tools that we have, so both the community and incentivization models. But I think that, we should think about the problems that are uniquely suited for being solved with using Web3 tools, even though these are problems that are extremely hard to solve, even by big pharmaceutical corporations in the past.
Great points. Yeah, I want to pick up the point about, solving unique problems that the existing system can't. So as an example, one of the projects that we're working on right now at lifespan.io is essentially the first of its kind, like truly decentralized clinical trial for an Alzheimer's therapy that's digital in nature, which, as you could probably guess, is almost like the perfect recipe for a decentralized trial, right? And also, I want to second what Jelani was saying in the world of big tech. There are, without giving away trade secrets, like we mentioned, but there are a lot of, large companies that you would know that are more than curious now and dipping their toes in, right? And you see press releases about that every day. And what's interesting about this too, that we can capitalize, I believe, is that it's creating at least social proof incentives for open sourcing some elements of what they do. And so that could be potentially very, very big if we can start to leverage some of the technologies in big tech that can help decentralized science. Some of those, rails, I believe, are starting to be created. And one point that I wanted to make in terms of like government regulations or just like government dealings in general, my personal experience, without again giving away any details from interfacing with a lot of relevant figures, is that you might want to knee-jerk think that these established organizations are like anti-crypto, or anti-blockchain or decentralized science. But I haven't found that to be the case, at least on the personal level. The vibe that I get is very much like, this stuff is awesome. We really want to do it, but we kind of can't right now. But if you sort of embarrass us in the right way, then we can. So it's kind of like a little bit of a green light there if we do things properly. So I think that's important context, that they're not necessarily the enemy. We could maybe work together in an interesting way. So,
and just a short comment. And I think when thinking about the trust, we are actually talking with Dinidh a lot about the technological layer of trust and institutional layer of trust. And the way we see it is that institutions are drawn to DeSci by the technological layer. And if you go out there and if you present your project or your solution as being supported by a number of reputable institutions, which is happening right now, that's how you gain the trust of the public, not by showing technology at the front and, self-custodian way of doing XYZ, but by showing, all the organizations or people that people tend to believe and trust, and saying, look, folks, these are the institutions that think that this makes sense. And in my opinion, we are slowly starting to see it with the adoption of the major corporations and bigger institutions and so on. And I firmly believe that we are going to reach a tipping point where this will no longer be, a heavy conversation to have about Web3 and crypto.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just to kind of round out Keith's points from the European perspective, we're hearing them talk about recommend blockchain as a technology, recommend decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, all these kinds of things, which actually, if you think about it, is going to hold them accountable. If we build these systems on blockchain, we can actually check if our government is using our data in a way that's not, we've not consented to. So, and that's fantastic. Jeffrey, please go ahead. You have a comment.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, so I strongly agree with the opinions above mentioned. So most important things for like individuals is the credits, and for the institutions, the reputation. So I think the Web3 and blockchains can well solve this problem because we can have like consensus records remarked on blockchain. And so basically I have like very specific scenarios for our platform. So if in the future, so like we say, we're gonna have like the preprints or unpublished works from our scientists or the researchers. So no matter it's data or the manuscript, but we need to check it or verify it. So I think for like the decentralized peer reviewing system is also very important to check or to verify whether the data is valid or the manuscript is right written. So I would say like the blockchains can provide for both like the tools for tokenize the papers and manuscript and data, and by the other hand, it can just organize then global communities between different countries such as the United States and United Kingdom, European countries, China and Japan. So by doing this way, I would say we have the like a unique standard for everybody to just give some comments and just showing their own credits based on their records on blockchain. So by doing this, I would say like we can effectively defend a cyber attack. For example, if I say like the data lake, when they submit some like the data, or whether we can check it's valid or not, it's a fake or it's just the trash data. So by doing this, we can just fully trust, even though the peoples on the blockchain can be just anonymous. Yep, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I want to pick up that point, Jeffrey, specifically in terms of like publications, right? So something that I don't think we've talked about yet, but is like super valuable that blockchain technology can bring to the existing, publishing apparatus is creating incentive models, and there are organizations like Research Hub that are doing this, right? To incentivize people to publish their failures, to publish replication studies, right? Which typically has not been something that's been incentivized and almost kind of disincentivized, right, in the existing system. And to go beyond that, there are other, decentralized science like publishing organizations that are going further than that to allow you to sort of upload your actual protocol. So in the case of the trial that I mentioned earlier with the digital therapy for Alzheimer's disease, the eventual goal there would be to have a module that's like downloadable from the published paper, where if you want to replicate this, here's exactly how you do it. And then you could submit your replication data. So I think that has the capability to revolutionize how medical publishing is done. So.
I have a question, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So, to the rest of the panelists, do you believe that DeSci or the target audience of the DeSci space should be predominantly or selectively scientists, as we classically call them, or are we looking also to generate a space for the wider public to be a part of?
I'll jump in again. I think it's obviously both, but definitely leaning towards also the latter, because I believe there was some chatter about this recently. I think Vitalik actually just did a podcast, not to keep bringing him up, but I think he just did this like 2 days ago. Maybe I think with Dinidh, I believe.
The DeSci podcast.
Oh yeah, a DeSci podcast. There you go. Where I 100% agree with what was stated there, which is like, I think there's a lot of geniuses out there that don't even know that they're geniuses, like high school kids or whatever. And the more that you can just engage someone to come at a problem with like first principles, like without knowing anything, like, oh, hey, like, what about this? I think a lot of breakthroughs come because of that. So definitely whatever we're doing should have that component. Absolutely. Like front and center.
Right. So the idea, to pivot off of that point, I'm glad that you said that, because I agree wholeheartedly with that, is that I think a lot of how DeSci is pitched to the world right now is very tailored towards the scientists and less towards the layman. And I think this is a two-part, not problem, but it's a two-part strategy that has to be implemented. Scientists are notoriously bad in terms of not publishing, but PRing themselves and like highlighting the value of science to the non-scientific community. And I'm seeing that kind of trend infiltrate into this DeSci space. Part of why my focus is a lot more on the science communications angle. And I think we need to be careful. It's well and good. We need to get the infrastructure. We need to get the specialists. We need to get the traditionally qualified in this space. But I think there needs to be a selective, proactive initiative to also get in those that are not formally trained, the grandmother who might want to donate her medical data to Wojciech and the donation platform and all these kind of things. I think there's almost two social communication initiatives that need to be generated for this. And I just want to call in action to all DeSci projects to keep that in mind. You're not just tailoring to the traditional formal scientists, but also the incumbent new novel scientists and in general people who you want us to be a part of your program.
Yeah, I can't resist to comment on this one, because this is something that we've been doing for the past 3 months, actually trying to figure out a way of communicating to the general public that, look, folks, you can share your data, you can do it, in an easy way, and that's the reason why you should think about doing that. And we are actually very bad in that at the beginning, and we are using complicated words like share your medical records to help scientists discover new therapies, only to discover that people do not understand the word scientists nor therapies, and they are afraid of the word data. So there's this whole communication framework that we are trying to get hold of, and it seems to be working so far. And we've already proven that we can actually get these patients on board. But yeah, fully agreed. And we are super excited with Dinidh actually to see how this will evolve with data lake, and how people and whether people are gonna be involved as much as we think.
Yeah. So just additional comments based on that. So I think everyone can embrace DeSci concept, but basic idea is that currently we need using the most effective way to educate everyone, or we are like every talent, just to know what DeSci is and what it's currently doing. Although now we say DeSci covers a lot of aspects, and we say like maybe in the future a more clear like the timeline or more clear plans will be just concluded. So by at that time, I always think we will largely reduce the cost and time for educating to let everybody knows what DeSci is. So I think from this onwards that we will have like bright futures to let everybody just involved in this big project. Yeah.
And one thing that we learned recently is that we as startup founders, as technology inventors, we tend to say a lot that we are the first one. This is a novel system. This is something brand new. We are the first ones doing that in the world. And actually, while communicating to the general public, what I think is needed is referral to something that people understand and know. So instead of saying that you've never seen something like that in your life, you should actually be saying, look, this is just like XYZ, but slightly different, right? So by referring to something which is familiar, you also address this point that people tend to be afraid of something that is new.
Yeah, I think the irony of this all, sorry, Keith, I'll make one last point. I think the irony of it all is that counterintuitively, I think the first participants into this space, once the builders are finished building their infrastructure, is not going to be the formerly trained scientists, but actually the science curious and the science adjacent. I'm looking forward to doing like a survey of the land once we've hit a certain maturation point, and I'd be now less surprised at that idea, but I think moving forward, a lot of people will be shocked at that paradox.
Absolutely. And just to jump in, I love that you used the term familiar there, Wojciech, because one of the models of like how to make like a YouTube thumbnail that's like successful, or like, is that this is one of the things that like, you get taught. It's like you have to pair something familiar with something novel. The familiar hooks them in, and the novelty makes them go like, wait a minute, I'm curious about that, right? So you're 100% accurate just in terms of like engagement tactics, right? And quick pitch, this goes for anybody in the DeSci community. If you have a concept that you want the public to know and engage with, like that's what we do at Lifespan with our big YouTube channel. So we're always happy to do like sponsored content to explain some cool topic using unfamiliar and familiar aspects like you mentioned. But you also made me think of something that is a minor headwind that I think we're currently contending with, and I'm optimistic that we'll build alternatives, but something that I've encountered a lot, and now I'm curious to hear from you all if you encountered this as well. Running a media outlet, we publish a lot, we use a lot of ads to boost things, right? And something that happens a lot, in particular with Google and very in particular with Facebook, is our boosts get blocked or flagged because it says like, hey, this is an unproven medical treatment, like you can't share news about this. But where the source material was actually like, it wasn't unproven or medical or treatment. It was about some research breakthrough at Harvard. So literally the Google and Facebook machine learning algorithms that are tagging content are like trained off of incorrect ground truth data that could potentially hamper the initial spread of ideas like DeSci. So I don't know if you have any thought, if you've encountered that, or if you have any thoughts on how we can get past that headwind. Again, I think we're going to get around it soon with alternatives, but that's a headwind that I've been encountering. I'm curious if you encounter it as well.
Well, I think, and also, so there was actually a question from the audience, which I think is tangentially related, and Cyrus asked, how can we prevent those big Web2 companies not controlling the Web3 space as they do the Web2, right? So yeah, Facebook, Google being the arbiters of information, how do we stop that? And I think, I mean, obviously the answer is technological, but I'd rather hear from you guys as well, your thoughts.
Well, I mean, so okay, so there are, you know, in governance models, and though I'm of the opinion that the current iteration of governance tactics and strategies are immature, then I think we're going to see much more in-depth and comprehensive ones moving forward that can account for more scenarios. But people are fundamentally trying to build these systems like quadratic voting and all these kind of things that make it so that power cannot be centralized in the hands of those that have the most capital. It's not foolproof. And this is definitely going to happen. And there is, you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about a trustless system, but there's still a human component to this. And so individuals can be swayed from a variety of reasons to vote here or there. That being said, what I think is nice and fantastic about the Web3 space is that you can vote with your feet. So let's say an entity were to come in, and Keith, I'm going to use you as an example here. Some gigantic entity was to come in and, you know, take control of Lifespan.io and all of their things. Well, in the instance of where Lifespan.io might be a DAO, well, you can just spin up another one, or you can spin up a fork one. And if you don't believe in this system, well, you can leave and start your own. I think the ease of start, like the barrier to start up new projects and to start up new initiatives and to seed a community is a lot easier in Web3, and that's what really drives the space. So it makes it less probabilistic, in my opinion, for this event to happen. It's not. I'm sure we'll see this moving forward. The space is so new. We're not finished seeing all the growing pains that we're going to have, but I think it's much more difficult, and people can move where they see fit.
Absolutely. And to answer my own question, what I think can happen, I don't know if Google and Facebook are going to do this themselves or the alternative Web3 versions of those companies that will arise that will do this. But, you know, imagine a world where the algorithm was open source, publicly known, and iterated on by everybody, and changes to the algorithm were voted upon by the DAO or whatever. I think that would create a much better version of that kind of stuff. So I don't know if we're going to be able to change the existing system or have to make a new one, but I think the model is clear of how we do that better.
Yeah, so in my opinion, I would say, like, if we compare the difference between the Web3 and Web2 platforms, we can see that no matter Google, Twitter, or Facebook, is an opaque system. So I think the most obvious different way is that in Web3 platform, we gonna have everything transparent for everybody. So I would not reject that the big companies will handle over within Web3 technology in the future. But if they can just open access all their data, I would say, like, yeah, we still welcome like the big company transfer from the Web2 world to Web3 world. But I would say, like, another idea is that the democracy or the ownership of like the data, it should be owned by the data creator. So yeah, so in the future, I would say, like, if no matter whether it's from the data is from like Web2 company or like the Web3 platform or the community, the most important thing is that we gonna have like the profits or the benefits just flowing back to the owners of this. So I would say, like, we will not reject any like Web2 or big companies transferring to the Web3 world.
Yeah, I want to just pay one caveat here. I think a lot of us, just for ease of conversation, talk about this framework in the confines of like Web2, Web3. But that's actually in my opinion, that's a spectrum, right? And in contact and talking with and advising to these Web 2 entities, what I think you're going to see is, depending on what problem they're trying to solve or what application of Web 3 technology they want to implement, is you're going to get this range of entities that exist between this Web 2, Web 3 divide, which will have different levels of opacity, transparency, privacy, and all these kind of things. So I think we're talking about it very holistically as one solid industry with certain criteria that define it. But I think it's going to be a mosaic of these different criteria implemented in different ways. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're talking, or when people, not the panelists, but people, new people coming into this space. You're not going to see one archetype of company. As a matter of fact, you'll probably see multiple different archetypes moving forward, and just keep that in mind.
I actually have a controversial thought that I wanted to share with you guys. Dinidh, don't stop me from doing that. And because we also, as Web3 founders, we tend to think about Web2 companies as, these evil, vicious behemoths that we are supposed to fight, which it's not always the case, which rarely is the case. And being a Web3 project or a protocol, some value creation may also accrue for the big corporations out there. For instance, in our case, we are collecting data of good quality, of proven provenance, which can actually accelerate R&D and research also for the pharmaceutical companies, to the ultimate benefit of patients. And if we look at the incentives of Web2 companies taking over Web3 protocols, it may just not make economic sense. Because if we manage to solve a problem that they were not able to do for many, many years, and we have developed a mechanism that creates value for these kind of stakeholders, it's just not pragmatic try to change something that works. And for some reason, we haven't replaced a blood donation system with a corporation, nor have we replaced organ donation system with a corporation. So I think this is also a different framework of thought, because probably it's, different things can be done technologically, but a different question is whether there is actually economic rationale to try to change something that may be ultimately beneficial for all the stakeholders, including the Web2 legacy players.
Yeah.
So sorry, no, go Jeffrey.
Oh, I think that was me.
Sorry, Keith, or whatever, whoever's going to say.
Yeah, I'll go on this one. So yeah, I want to pick up on that, Wojciech, with like a very specific example involving COVID-19, right? Because I 100% agree with you that the quickest way to the goal is to create natural incentives for these Web2 organizations to adopt the principles of Web3 that we care about. That's the quickest way to the goal, right? And one specific example is when COVID first started, you probably saw in the news that there was a lot of these organizations that were trying to work on different diagnostic methods, one of them being like voice-based diagnostics for COVID, right? Without getting into details that I can't get into, I was somewhat involved in that in various ways. And one of the things that I noticed was a lot of the different organizations, each one was collecting a very similar data set with just like a slight tweak, but they care about linguistics or they care about frequency. So they're not collecting everything, right? But if there was an incentive model that was unifying the data, saying, hey, everybody collect this maximal data set, that would have served the world to help us get out of COVID quicker, but also serve each of their proprietary algorithms, because now we have a larger data set that you can train on, And when I saw that happen, it really just lit a fire under me of how we have to achieve these goals of decentralized science. Because if COVID was worse, that could, it's like a potential like world-ending scenario that could have been avoided if we can overcome like bureaucracy. So like it really like underlined it, like this isn't like a game. This is like super serious if we can solve these problems.
And if I may, just one last quick point to Wojciech's last point. I think the argument of this, or what's fueling this Web3 versus Web2 divide, we're taking it on from the DeFi space, where governance and accreditation or credibility within a particular DAO stems from what you can financially invest into it. And DeSci, I think, operates fundamentally differently, whereby most of your obtaining of governance tokens or governance rights or credentials within a system is based off of what you can contribute. And that's not all financial. And so if a Web3 company can come in, and yes, they may be able to capitally buy tokens, but if you're working within a system where your merit and what you contribute is as important as to what you can invest financially, that makes it much more difficult, or a much better breeding ground for innovation, and much more difficult to, let's say, take over, because it's not based off of how much money you can throw at it. And DeSci fundamentally is not based off of that. So I think that qualm that people like to pitch is because they're coming from the DeFi sphere, and there's a whole different set of rules in this space. I think emphasizing that a lot moving forward, and that's what I've started to do to help people kind of understand how these spaces are different, and how why I believe DeSci is kind of the leading charge here.
I absolutely love what you said. And there is, this narrative of in DeFi of building an alternative finance system, right? We are not building an alternative healthcare system. We are just building tools for the healthcare system to work in a more efficient manner. And the other thing that I've noticed is the people that are attracted to both kinds of movements. For instance, I'll tell you a secret. It's not a trade secret, but very few people in data lake actually trade tokens. I probably, in my portfolio, I have ETH. I keep it there. I'm not an active trader. And people who are, emotionally invested in our project actually want to build something. And, they come from the industry and they want to solve problems that we have previously seen, which is a very different breed of people from the folks that from being involved in DeFi space as such.
They'll come though. Once we start to build out treasuries and utility and incentive and royalty mechanisms, they'll come, but they won't be the first people in this space, and they probably won't be the last people in this space either. They'll come in for spurts and then they'll leave, and it'll be fine.
You guys have really done a fantastic job of bringing me to the kind of last question, last topic, which is talking specifically about this. So we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about DAOs, we've talked about governance. How do you see the role of DAOs in funding scientific research specifically? And we've kind of already answered this as well, but how do we avoid the typical issues that we see in DeFi and DeSci? So where do you guys see DAOs? They're not perfect. They're not perfect organizations. They're not perfect democratic creations. They have some issues. However, I'm sure you all agree that they have the potential to really change the way that we fund science. How do you see that happening? And how do you think we can avoid the traditional DeFi pitfalls?
I think DAOs will fit where they fit. So DAOs inherently are immature. You can speak to, and I very much recommend people to go look out the DAO Research Collective and Talent DAO, who publishes articles on DAO best practices and whatnot. And just by reading those, you can realize just how immature DAOs and those who are creating DAOs are. They're not at their maturation form. But I think fundamentally overall, the DAOs will fit in a certain criteria of DeSci. They're not the be all end all. They're not going to be the ultimate form to address all particular problem sets, right? We talk about DeFi, and I think a lot of us here are operating within the medical sphere. Sorry, DeFi. We're talking about DeSci. Many of us work in the biomedical sphere, but science is wide, and DeSci is wide with it as well, right? We have space, we have physics, we have all these different forms of science, and I think DAOs will find their niche in certain aspects of them, but they're not going to solve all the problems. So you will need centralized entities. Against a lot of people, people will cringe at that, but there is centralization aspects. I think DeSci will be largely more centralized than decentralized, at least at a certain layer, whether it be the validation layer or the application layer. But in terms of DAO concepts and philosophy, in terms of bringing in a community to help support your initiatives and to help support the space, whether it be through funding, mind power, collectiveness, that's where that's going to feed into. Whether that be the ultimate form of a DAO, and we see it right now, I don't know. But I think that personally, that's where I see it. But it's not the be all end all.
Yeah, I want to take this question from two angles, purely the funding angle and then sort of like meta structures for the entire field, right? On the funding angle, I really see that with all the caveats that Jelani mentioned, very critical in the funding of public goods going forward. That's why I've been working with organizations like Gitcoin in the past, right? And continuing to do so. But as an example, I'm working with kind of a consortium of blockchain philanthropy organizations like Gitcoin, like Angel Protocol, like Endowment, Proof of Good, right? Some of these your audience might know. Because I think there's a way to kind of combine all of these elements together to create like an amazing, NFT kind of social proof method that can gather philanthropic donations into like a perpetual endowment model that then funds the field based on voting from the people that hold those NFTs, etc. So I'm being very glib here because that's a very complicated, but this is one of like the master things that I've been working on for the past couple of years, and that involves interfacing with a lot of different organizations, which brings me to my second point. One area that I think we can really work on to help improve the whole pace of scientific research is for each of us and each of the other DeSci organizations out there to not try to do absolutely everything themselves. Try to identify what you're great at and then find the interoperation points. As one very naive example, let's say we do that Alzheimer's trial and we put the patients on something like, any of the ones that we talked about here, like, CureDAO, Genico, Data Lake, etc. So there's the data exists there, but then some other service integrates with it to help structure the clinical trial for it, right? But then say a paper gets published off of it. Maybe that's an interoperation point with Research Hub. And if the paper does phenomenally well and gets a lot of Research Hub tokens or whatever, then maybe through an interoperation point, some of those tokens get converted into data lake tokens or whatever and flow back to the people who contributed the data that led to that great publication. So this is just one example of how I think we almost need to have a DAO of DAOs, or like a meta DAO, where we all figure out how to interoperate with each other in the optimal way.
Yeah, following to like the case comment, I have just a supplementary comments on like how to avoid the pitfall of like DeFi or the bear markets. So actually, I think to establish the DAO and the most serious problem here now, it's like the KYC. So to know our like the community's members. So I would say like currently although we have like the DID, decentralized ID, or like we have L2, we have zero knowledge, but still it's far from the current system and with the low efficient, because as we are currently launching the Scisets, but we meet the same problem here, that if we launch a DAO, we don't know who you are, where you come from. So I would say currently we can only use the toolkits to just help with us to identify from the trusted party, like the ORCID and seamlessaccess.org, to check whether you come from the real university or like the research institute. So that would be the barriers when we just go further from like the DAO, no matter for the fundraising, but also like the academic publication DAO. Yes.
Yeah, so just quickly addressing the DAO and what you've said, Keith. I think that the framework of thought that most of Web3 projects have right now is thinking about ecosystems and collaboration. And I think that this is fantastic. This is what we are also designing as Data Lake. So essentially, we keep the ecosystem open. We are saying, do you want to help us with harvesting of the data? Well, here's the framework that you can use to actually be rewarded for that. You want to help us with collecting consents? Well, we have tools for you. You're welcome on board. Come help us. And this is a very different framework of thought than previous ones, when it was all about amassing the IP in one single entity backed by VCs and corporations and so on. And to address what you have said, Jeffrey, about KYC, also science and healthcare is very heavily regulated sphere, and rightfully so, because we are responsible for people's health and lives and safety and so on and so on. So for instance, in our case, in order to be able to rightfully manage people's data, you have to have a legal controller of the data. You have to have either a physical person or a legal entity that takes the responsibility. And if we look at what we are building from a philosophical perspective, we are not building tools to avoid responsibility. We are building tools actually to increase trust, which is not a responsibility avoiding framework. So I fully agree with what you, Jelani, said at the beginning, and I think that you've just put your finger on it, that DAOs belong where they belong and where they actually help to solve problems, but not everywhere, certainly not everywhere in DeSci.
Yeah. One quick point on just the internal workings of DAOs too, because just like every term that we've talked about here, it's easy to just become monolithic. I think it's just this means this one thing, right? There's a lot of different types of DAOs. There's a lot of different ways that they can work. And one of the struggles that I see, because unfortunately, a sign of the times, I'm part of like 86 different DAOs, like I'm sure you all are. is knowing which things to centralize and which things to decentralize, right? So that you can move quickly, but still get the community engagement where you need it. And that's a struggle in every DAO, but you know, that's something I think that's being figured out right now. There's not like a one size fits all best practice.
I absolutely agree, and I just wanted to make a point for those listening. You know, I put on this event, but I specifically invited the speakers that I did because they are all out there in the DeSci and Web3 community trying to make these links, right? Trying to build awareness, trying to build opportunities for collaboration. And you know, the longer I've been in blockchain, maybe 12, 13 years now. I had Bitcoin when it was like sub $50, and I was part of that. You know, I helped on the Monero community a little bit. And there was a different collaborative spirit back then, right? And then we went into Binance Smart Chain shitcoin territory, and everyone was just like, every man for themselves, every project for themselves, cash grabs, rug pulls, all this nonsense, right? But I feel like DeSci represents a change in the blockchain community, and that's why you guys are all here. Because you're trying to make those connections. And I think what's really, really important and exciting, even as you mentioned, Keith and Wojciech, you talked about this as well, is we are now in a position where we have so many really intelligent people working on incredible technologies in their corner of DeSci. But with these collaborative tools that we have, with these frameworks, these open sourcing of modules, let's put it that way, we can all kind of use each other's work, support each other's work, and create ecosystems and you know, circulating ecosystems with multiple parts, right? And that's super exciting. So I just, before I forget, want to thank you guys for your contributions to DeSci. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. I see Maria Freitas just raised her hand. So Maria, if you would like to, I'm going to bring you on stage so that you can speak and ask your question to our panelists. And your microphone is muted, so you're going to have to press the red microphone icon if you see it.
Yeah, it's a micro button, so it's kind of difficult. Hello, guys. Very nice to see Jelani here and Jeffrey and also Wojciech. How are you? I'm a Maria Goretti Freitas. I'm joining you today from São Paulo, Brazil. Let me put my hand down. Very nice to meet you, Dinidh and Keith. Have seen you around on Twitter. We are here in Brazil building a ecosystem of decentralized science. And I have a question for all of you. I have been a scientist for more than 40 years, and you all know that we are highly competitive. Well, let me put it in a different way. We have grown in a highly competitive environment. You know, I was a mosquito person when I was working for Fiocruz here in Brazil, and we had another mosquito lab. It was a neighboring lab, and we used to whisper when we had some findings, you know, so much competition was around. So I have a question, and I want to know what you think about DeSci, if we will be able to overcome this culture and work collaboratively.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. Yeah, so I totally get what you're saying, Maria, and obviously thank you for your 40 years of work. You know, so obviously the mentality here that factors into this is that, you know, we've all heard it before, publish or perish, right? And having that gun to your head incentivizes a lot of bad practices, right? You know, just get things out as soon as possible. You know, you don't want to get scooped. Maybe you don't want to collaborate with people because you want to hoard the credit for yourself. Not to say that all scientists do that, but to your point, the system kind of incentivizes that, right? And through some of what we talked about earlier, I think we can create incentive models that overcome that. So as we mentioned earlier, there could literally be, you know, on-chain clout and credit in addition to financial incentives to publishing, reproducing data from someone else, publishing your failures, but most specifically to your point, to really incentivize somebody to collaborate with somebody else or publish an addendum to somebody else's paper, right? So that if they're extremely incentivized to do that, they'll be less likely to want to go in their own corner and do it by themselves because they're getting just as much public recognition and they're maybe even getting financially compensated. Not that that's all going to be super easy to get it perfectly, but I think we can create new incentive models, basically.
Yeah. I think.
So you can go first. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go first. So to kind of jump off of Keith's point, I think to exactly what Keith said, I very much agree. We've been forged in a system that is publish or perish. It's highly competitive, which I think is not inherently necessarily bad, but definitely breeds bad practices. And I think opening up and creating more incentive mechanisms will allow individuals who have this competitive edge to also breathe to a certain extent, which I think will drive innovation. And when innovation becomes the benchmark and not publishing itself, is when we're going to see a lot of progress and the scientific industry is going to boom. But I think we are creating, to Wojciech's other previous point, we're not looking to necessarily obliterate a previous system. We're creating a parallel system that people can opt in and opt out of. People have heard me say this many times. And this will allow a certain breadth and ease and comfortability to scientists to be able to pursue the science that they want to pursue and not that they have to pursue. So competition will always be there, and I hope competition will always be there, but it's competition without malice. It's competition with a shared objective in mind. And I think that's what we're going to bring. That's that subtlety that we're bringing back into the culture of science.
Yeah, I strongly agree with the Keith and Jelani as from the like collaborations and competition. So I would say something from the negative side is that I would like the competition is somewhat like the predatory publishing. I think a lot of like the publishing houses or like the academic institutions are just suffering from this problem. So like Maria, so you have like 40 years on like mosquito research, or someone just say, wow, this your research project was so awesome, so I would like just steal your like your ideas. I would say like this could happen. So that's why we need the tokenization of our like the paper or like manuscript. We can provide a strong evidence on the chain to help you protect your ideas in the very initial stage. Even you have drafted your like initial project or like the very starting point of your ideas. So on the other hand, I would say like in the future, the manuscript or like collaborations could be more regulated following to that multiple ownership of that.
Thankfully, I think he got out the key point.
Yeah. Hopefully you caught all of that. While we wait,
I might just summarize one last point, is that I think what Jeffrey touches upon is a really interesting idea of like, if you can timestamp or NFT stamp when you have your idea, that does speak a lot to who actually, so solving the issue of who actually had this idea first, and then moving forward. I think that introduces a whole interesting paradigm to, again, all of this speaks to the culture of science. And I think fundamentally the tech is just the toolkit. And really the problem is the culture of science is broken. It's not necessarily the tools that are there and all this kind of stuff. It's the culture. And how are we, interestingly enough, going to use this technology to change something that is as ambiguous as culture? And I think that's the focus. And that's where we're really going to see the change.
Just another quick knock-on benefit to what you just said, Jelani. If we had a system like that, it would also create rapid iteration, because you wouldn't have to feel like I got to make this paper have everything. It's like the second I have one micro idea, like, oh, I could just publish that, get it out there, and also timestamp it, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, big shout out to DeSci Nodes. I think DeSci nodes as a primitive for the Web3 space is going to be revolutionary to how we do science, just at a basis, right? Everyone is building really cool tech, but very few decentralized primitives are being built. And DeSci nodes to me that's my finisher when I talk to scientists about DeSci. It's all this, blockchain stuff. That's cool. That's, neat and on fringe. When I show them a model of DeSci nodes and how you can iterate on your thing, you can time stamp, you can add micro publications within one field, one object. That's what sells it. So big shout out to them.
Thank you guys for your responses. Maria, I'll just give you an opportunity. Do you have any follow-up questions, anything to say? Feel free before we move on to the next question.
No, I thank you guys for your answers. Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, very much for your question and for your attendance as well. So let me see. I think Jeffrey, we may have. Yeah. All right. We've lost him for now, but that's okay. So we have a couple of questions coming in, which I'd like. We have a few minutes here to wrap up and just hit these. So the general ones we have are: do you think it is better to avoid the crypto, blockchain, and other terms altogether for people who have never had contact with crypto? They use the example of our foundation, the Donate Your Data Foundation, where we made a conscious decision not to include those words, simply because we found that even the word data was quite frightening for patients. And so going into blockchain and DLT is just too much. But do you feel like we need to avoid these terms altogether, or is it more a question of, step-by-step, baby steps, education, and then, bringing people into the fold? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll say I don't think we need to get rid of those terms completely. I do think what is true, though, and maybe somewhat obvious, is that I think it's very important to always be fully authentic, but there's also some tactical worth in knowing like which aspects of your authentic message are right for which audiences, right? So as an example, on the YouTube channel that I mentioned, we have some topics now that might have some sponsors or whatever that are blockchain related, but maybe we play up the aspect of community building and getting involved and crowdsourcing in that venue, right? So I think it's not getting rid of the terms crypto and blockchain, it's having a pool of other terms in your arsenal to use at the right time.
Yeah, ELI 5 exists. ELI 5 is a concept. Explain it like I'm 5 years old. It exists for a reason, right? I'm not gonna start talking to somebody who has no background in neuroimmunology, the technical terms that I use on my day-to-day life, or talking to another specialist, right? You need to cater your information and your delivery to your audience. Again, I think it's something that we struggle sometimes as scientists. Just inherently, we think things are simple when they're not necessarily the case. We're untrained, formally trained. And it's all good. You gotta cater to your audience.
Yeah, Jelani, I think your mic may have switched to a different one because you started to sound a little muffled. I think we're probably better now, though. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So just in the goal of getting the questions answered from the public, we have a couple more. Last two, and then we'll close out. The first one is the medical data being donated to Data Lake being anonymized? Wojciech, I mean, yes and no. Why don't you just take a quick answer on that one?
Yes.
Okay. Unless it's for a very specific purpose, but then it would never be shared without your specific consent for the non-anonymized data. So that is that answer. Number two, what are the panel's thoughts on the advent of the Filecoin virtual machine and decentralized compute?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Filecoin's decentralized or the FVM Filecoin's virtual machine that is coming up, but decentralized computational networks are not new. They're actually a very old concept, and they've existed for a long time. You can go look up a variety of them that already exist. Gridcoin is one, Boink is another, or I guess they derive from each other, but there are a slew of them. And they have their place within the realm, but they're not new. So I don't know about how Filecoins might be different, but they're very useful as it pertains to. And a good example of this is that the Gridcoin Boink decentralized computation network was one that gave rise to medical innovation that addressed certain problems in the pandemic that we just faced. So they contributed to the development of therapies that were useful and are actually in use in places like Korea currently. So they're a very powerful tool to be used in the medical sphere, but also throughout the science sphere.
So I actually have one really real quick thought on the Filecoin data storage protocol. So actually, for us, what has been problematic with potentially using any kind of decentralized solution for storage of medical data, including Filecoin, is the necessity of having a proof of location. So you actually have to be able to show where the servers that store sensitive information and medical data are located, which is obviously not possible with the Filecoin network. As far as I know, they are developing a solution that is capable of computing the latency times between the nodes and being able to show what is, with some degree of confidence, the location of the data and where is it stored. But this is nowhere close to being ready, as far as I know, and for sure nowhere close from being regulatory approved. So for us, for the lack of better alternative, we just have to go with something that is acceptable legally. So for instance, cloud storage for medical data with exact servers located within the EU and so on and so on. But that's the only comment I have on the Filecoin VM.
Yeah, I think Jelani and Wojciech covered my comments as well. But the one piggyback off of what Wojciech just said is that this is a good example of how there is a regulatory component to what we do here. So we can identify as a community, you know, if HIPAA compliance can be changed in slight ways that would make these things not an issue, that would be a good thing, et cetera. And we can target those and work for those. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be some DeSci lobbying organization that will emerge at some point if it hasn't already.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Okay, very last question is the intersection of DeSci and Metaverse. Keith, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about this. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Okay, so this is actually the area that I'm like most super excited about, and I'll be circumspect with what I say so I don't get like, you know, killed by various organizations that I might work with. But just to say it vaguely, it's probably very clear to you that certain physiological biomarker tools that we use in science, you know, grip strength, walking gait, face, voice, this and that, obviously are directly related in metaverse experiences as well. So I think that there are ways to be able to unify efforts there to create incentive models to allow companies to participate in that as after we have the privacy preserving on-chain validated, because there's obviously going to be a public barrier there. But if we can solve that, I think that can be a massive, massive win. And I'll give you one example that's a fun example that I'm working on with Lifespan.io. Some of you may or may not have heard of the fable of the dragon tyrant, right? It's this metaphor for aging that was put out by this philosopher, Nick Bostrom. And the reason why you might know it is Vitalik Buterin is fond of it. It's on his Twitter profile right now. He's kind of linking a video that describes it. So I'm working right now with, you know, various companies and some like AAA blockchain gaming companies to make a game about the fable of the dragon tyrant, where people in the game are working to defeat the dragon tyrant, which is aging. But by doing so, through interesting tokenomics, also raising money for charity while they're doing that. So they're fighting the dragon tyrant in real life while doing that. But here's the part that's relevant. There's certain aspects physiologically that you can bring to the game. So it's a competitive game. But what if I have a digital twin that if it's in my wallet while I'm playing that game, the game knows that. And if I've slept really well, my character has a few more hit points. If I've done a lot of push-ups, my character is stronger. So now you're creating these just implicit, soft incentivization models to make people take care of themselves. And if all of those other issues are figured out, maybe ways to collect actually usable data that then can supplement decentralized science systems. So long story short, without getting into too many details, this could be the area that actually really opens the doors to all of this stuff. So I'm excited by it.
Man, this is really exciting. And so far, I have been a huge skeptic of the metaverse from a perspective of a physician, because it just drives people to spend more time in front of the computer. But what you have just said is hugely interesting for one reason, because all the prophylactic actions that we are taking, so good sleep, hydration, physical exercise, you don't usually see immediate rewards. You have to do it for days or weeks or months to feel slightly better, and you may not be able to it may escape your perception. But if we have a model where you've slept well or where you stay hydrated, you actually have this kind of immediate gratification of upgrading your character in the metaverse. this might be a game changer. So thank you for giving me the first reason to actually believe that Metaverse might be of some use for humanity.
Yeah,
I've been waiting for that for the whole year.
It's like the next iteration of move to earn, right? Except the earn doesn't have to be financial, right? Whatever the paradigm of the metaverse that you're working in. But that's, I mean, Keith, we've talked a little bit about this, but I'm very excited about seeing that move forward. I think other implications or other applications of metaverse speak mainly to science communication and science education, right? Metaverse universities, whereby participants, international students don't need to pay an arm and a leg to move to another country if they don't need to participate in science. A lot of people are geo-locked out of industries and education opportunities because of that geo-lock. And being able to decentralize this and open this up, I think education as a whole is going to really benefit from the concept of the metaverse. Education falls squarely within science to me. As a methodology and practice. So that's one major area that I'm looking forward to see on top of the move to earn, which would be great.
Fantastic. I know you mentioned this to me, Keith, in our call as well. I think it's amazing. And what I love about it is it takes the digital world, it takes the tangible world, and it brings them together. And it reinforces good behaviors, perhaps in the real world, based on our digital interactions, rather than incentivizing digital participation and moving away from the real world. So absolutely fantastic. I feel like it almost is worth its own workshop, its own roundtable discussion. So we will keep that in mind. Speaking of which, we are coming to the end of our roundtable. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I really, really want to thank our speakers for sharing their wealth of knowledge, their thoughts, some predictions maybe for the future. I really want to thank everyone who attended and who took time out of their Tuesday night or day, wherever you are in the world, to join us. I would love to invite all of you, if you are watching, because we are going to put this out also on YouTube and on our different channels. We have coming up on February 11th, our second ever DeSci event, and I'm super excited about this. It's happening on the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And the second topic is Women in Science, Trailblazers and Innovators. And we have a multidisciplinary, intergenerational team of women scientists, girl scientists, including students all the way to trailblazers, who are going to be talking about the opportunities for women in science, the challenges they face, and also specifically Web3 and DeSci for women. So super excited about that. I will, the event's happening on February 11th, same time, 8 o'clock. And I will send out the details on the channel that you likely found this event from, so you will see it pop up. Please do join us for that. Find these brilliant minds on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever you can. Jelani, Keith, Wojciech, Jeffrey, who unfortunately had some internet issues right at the end, but thank you so much. Guys, I really, if you're watching, go follow these people, go connect with them if you can. And, let's continue that collaboration and that networking effect to really make Web3 and DeSci kick ass in this world. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. Audience, thank you again. Have a lovely, lovely evening, day, wherever you are in the world, and we will see you at our next event.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.